As Alex said, my name is Cynthia Bowen. I am the project manager for the Monument Circle Reconstruction team. I am the Director of Planning and Landscape Architecture at CHA Consulting, which is a local planning and engineering firm. So today I want to talk a little bit about what's happening, what this project is about, and where we are in the design, and what some of the plans are and where we think we're going to head. Indianapolis DPW hired a total of 17 consultants to really work on this complex project. And the project, while we have 2 project managers in the Department of Public Works, we actually touch many of the various departments in the city of Indianapolis, including the Department of Metropolitan Development, the Police Department, Fire Department, Homeland Security, Code Enforcement. So there are many agencies that are involved in this project as well as just DPW. The project really extends from Capitol to the west, New York to the north, Alabama to the east, and Georgia Street from the west. So eventually we're looking at reconstructing and redesigning this entire project area. But because of the complex nature of the project and because the project does not have funding at this point in time, we've really broken it down into 3 phases. So phase 1 is what you see in red up here, which we call Governor Square. So it's the old circle and square that we know now as Monument Circle. So that we're working on 30% designs right now. The blue area that you see along Meridian Street will be the second phase of construction, where we'll then work on those spokes. And then finally, we will then work on the Market Street area. And I'll talk to you a little bit about what that schedule is in the past. So currently, as it stands, the circle is broken up into 3 zones. We have the monument here on your left of the screen, and that property is actually owned by the state of Indiana. And that property goes out into what you see as the 25-foot pedestrian zone. So you see in the light or dark purple there, the pedestrian zone, and then the green there is the bollards and landscaping that you see around the circle, and that is all owned by the state. You then move into the vehicular zone, where we actually have 3 lanes of travel and 1 kind of parking loading zone lane, if you will. And that is under city control. And then we have a 25-foot pedestrian zone up against that goes all the way to the buildings. And so we're looking at, how do we begin to manipulate this particular cross-section to create an area that is more advantageous and supportive of a pedestrian environment and less from a vehicular environment. Now, there's many different reasons why we have to look at the circle and the reconstructing of it. The majority of that reason is because the infrastructure is deteriorating. Over the years, DPW has replaced the pavement and the bricks in order to try to maintain this roadway. And the existing pavement that you see down there now and the bricks have been in place for over 35 years. The sub-base, which is the concrete base underneath the bricks that holds the bricks in place, is over 60 years old. And what really is happening is that sub-base is deteriorating. And so it's causing the bricks to be loosened. It's causing water issues. We're seeing water damage to some buildings. It's puddling up on the street and really deteriorating the entire system. And finally, a lot of the sidewalks on there do not meet the current ADA requirements from the federal government. So in undertaking this project, we're looking at how do we make it more modern, but also how do we then make it current with all the standards and codes. We also have a lot of obsolete infrastructure in this particular area. As you see from the pictures here, when we need to close down the circle for events, we have to use a variety of gates and cones and police cars to close the circle to make it safe for these events. And, it becomes very costly for the people who rent out that space as well as the city in order to shut that down. Additionally, people really, there's no signage leading up to the circle telling people, the circle's closed, you shouldn't travel to the circle, you need to move out and move a different direction to get around that circle. So those are going to be things that we're looking at. And then finally, the infrastructure in terms of lighting, electricity, sound, water systems to access water to water the plants is not in place right now. A lot of times we have to bring in extra transformers and such when we have big production shows on the circle. We've now had IPL, which has installed particular electrical boxes that people can charge their phones on the circle. So as technology has changed, the circle has not quite kept up to what you see is there. And so it's been difficult to program events in this area. So what are the goals for this particular project? Well, of course, the big and most important goal is that we improve the aging infrastructure, that we bring it current to how we're using spaces these days, and that we're really promoting efficient movement of vehicles and pedestrian traffic. We want to try to increase the walkability and accessibility and really create a sense of place amongst the circle that it had, back when it was first created in the 1800s. The circle is the center of our city. And so we're trying to figure out how do we really increase and better connect with other areas, whether it's University Park, Georgia Street, the Capitol, the Cultural Trail. How can we enhance these connections and make it as a transfer point, if you will, to all these other spaces that we have in the city? And then finally, we really need to figure out, how do we then begin to operate and proactively program this circle other than the events just coming here? And how do we maintain this specialized infrastructure that we have on that circle? So as part of this process, we will be defining the characteristics of a management entity who would need to oversee the programming and the operations of the circle and help to coordinate permits and events that occur there. Now, the entire reconstruction project goes beyond just redesigning a street and adding in streetscape. There are so many other components to what we're doing. Besides doing all of the design of the street from building face to building face, we're redesigning all of the infrastructure underneath the ground. We're looking at traffic and how it moves through the circle, both pedestrian, bicycle, vehicular, and how we can connect to various transit points. We're looking at programming. How can we in the short term activate this space even more on a day-to-day basis versus how do we end up programming for the large events that are going to occur several times throughout the year. And so we're working on a programming phase on this. As I mentioned before, the project is not funded at this point in time, and so we're putting together a funding strategy to determine, what are existing sources that we could capitalize on, and then how do we leverage federal funds. And then, of course, there's the large public outreach, because while this does affect the tenants that are along this place, everybody knows the circle across the state, and everybody it evokes an emotion and an opinion on what to happen in this particular area. So we have to have a very strong public outreach component. And then finally, we're looking at how do we enhance the space with various public art. Now, in terms of our project process, we've gone out and we've examined the space. We've kind of watched how traffic moves through this space. We've watched how people use the space. We've watched the turning of trucks trying to get in and maneuver in and out of the alleyways. You see some pictures here of the various events that we've attended. We try to go out and attend every single event that is on this space so we can see, how do they set up their tents? Where do they set up their tents? What's the impact to the existing businesses? What's the impact to the traffic? How do pedestrians then flow through the space? Because what we're trying to get from that is understanding what other design enhancements can we make that will help facilitate and ease programming into this various space. As I mentioned before, we have a strong public outreach campaign. And so we're now in, if you will, the second phase of this project where we're into the design part. And so we've already had numerous stakeholder meetings. We've held a kickoff meeting with the tenants and discussed what we were going to do on the space so they knew who the project team was and know how to contact us. We've had property management discussions, even talking about how our uses might change in this space. Are there other vacant lots that might be developed over the period of time, and what's going to be how's that going to impact this roadway and this corridor? We've had various media briefings, public meetings. We have a social media platform that we're working on. We will have booths at community events, and then we're also conducting very specialized focus group meetings focusing on programming and design and the like. So we're really trying to engage the public in the conversation about this space because it is unique and important to the city. Last fall, we held a placemaking workshop with a variety of entities and people that care about this space. We went out and we walked around the space to understand what's been going on, what are some of the ideas that we can generate for future programs in the area. We brainstormed other partnerships and then potential infrastructure and design changes that people wanted to see. We then held a design workshop with the project team, our client, the City of Indianapolis, and various stakeholders. And ultimately what we started to do was figure out some of the design concepts for the circle and these intersecting streets. It was a 4-day event where we kicked it off with a presentation highlighting a lot of the issues and what we had heard at some of these other focus group meetings and the placemaking workshop. The design team worked day and night through that for the next couple of days and then did a final presentation on that 4th day about what some of the concepts were and some of the things that we could do with this particular space. Right now, we're really focusing on programming. And the ultimate thing that we want to do, while we know we have to have various pedestrian amenities within this space, we really need to create a flexible space. And from a programming standpoint, we're trying to figure out how do you begin to activate this space on a day-to-day basis? How do you get people to use it more than just sitting on the monument and looking at the monument, admiring it, and then watching the people move by? We're looking at how do you offer a variety of programs and events all year round. So not only are we activating it daily, but what are some of the major things that we could do monthly and that could then become an annual thing that we're doing? We already have some things in terms of the Circle of Lights. We talked about how do we increase pedestrian access, bike access, transit access, and connect to the multiple destinations, that people are seeing this as a space to come to as a destination and not necessarily through on their way to get to someplace else. And ultimately, we need to be flexible with the design so that various elements that we put into the space could be moved around so we can configure it in different ways to allow for and support this programming. So what we're looking at is starting with some short-term interventions. What can we do right now before we change the space, before we redesign it, to get people thinking about the reactivation of it and using it more from a day-to-day perspective? What are some of the things that we can do to help calm the traffic? As I said, we don't want people just traveling through the space. We want them to stop and enjoy this particular space. We're talking with multiple partners throughout this space to see how they might interact with the space and what programs could they put on from a day-to-day perspective to really activate this area. And then one of the things that we found out from all of our tenant meetings and focus group meetings was how do we really create a one-stop shop for event permitting and coordination. Right now, as it stands, people, if you want to hold an event on the circle, have to go through multiple different agencies, both at the city and the state level, because they both own the space, in order to activate it, to do things there. So is there a way for us to really create a one-stop shop where they just go one place and get all these agencies taken care of? So these are some of the things that we're thinking about through the programming perspective. Now, as I said with funding, we have multiple years before we start constructing and reconstructing the circle, but we really need to prepare a financing strategy for the city in order to get this project funded. So right now we're investigating potential revenue options. What are some of the, as I said, the existing city funds that we might be able to tap into? What are some of the other things in terms of public-private partnerships that we might be able to explore to allow us to fund this particular project? We've been doing a lot of research and we're projecting out the maintenance and operational costs of this project so we can really come up with a realistic budget for these particular improvements, and then can help provide the city with a strategy of how to maintain it after everything has been constructed. And then finally, we're really trying to leverage federal grants. There's a lot of programs out there such as CMAQ and Tiger that the federal government has that we could really leverage for this particular project because it is a unique project. It's a kind of multi-jurisdiction, multiple-tiered, multiple-layered project that checks a lot of the boxes on these funding mechanisms. And so figuring out how we leverage those and bring those dollars into the city to help revitalize and revamp this space is really another one of our strategies. Now, in terms of the conceptual design, we are looking at the total reconstruction of the circle. And as you can see there, we go from building face to building face. We are looking at making the entire circle flat so that it would be a curbless environment. Right now, a lot of things that we're hearing is that people are tripping over the bricks and the curbs that surround the planters have become problematic for people getting out of their cars and trying to enter into these particular buildings. We're looking at replacing the brick pavement down there and enhancing the sidewalks. And I'll show you a cross section in just a moment about what we're doing. We're reducing the driving lanes. So instead of having 3 driving lanes, we're going down to 2 driving lanes and still keeping that flex parking and loading zone, but also allowing that to be used for programming. And then we're also rebuilding all of the subsurface infrastructure. So we're looking at how do we treat drainage and what do we do with the electrical systems and how can we incorporate more light and sound. So we're really not only providing light as a safety perspective, but how are we enhancing the buildings and really showcasing the architecture of the monument, its statues, and these surrounding buildings. So those are some of the things that we're looking at. As you can see here, we zoom in on one of the quadrants. We're looking at what we call a 40, 33, 27 cross section, where we're going to increase the pedestrian space from the buildings out to 40 feet. So we really have this grand promenade that people can walk around. As I indicated, we're going to reduce the roadway to 33 feet, so we only have 2 travel lanes. And it really is not going to impact traffic that much. Most people these days, if you're out watching them, only use 1 lane of the circle to travel around, not all 2 or 3 lanes that are out there. And a lot of times you'll see emergency vehicles and other vehicles parked in either the inner or the outer lane, and it's still not disrupting traffic. So we believe with going down to 2 lanes, 2 travel lanes, we're not going to be impacting that. We're expanding the inner promenade, which is where the state property is, to 27 feet. So we can activate that inner space around the circle. We're looking at how do we make the monument more ADA accessible to a variety of people coming to these particular areas. And then we're rethinking the pattern and the design within the pavement, as well as how do we add little pops of color within the particular area. As I said, this is kind of what the cross section would look like. We have the outer promenade at 40 feet, which is what would be up against the buildings. As you see, what we're looking at from a programming standpoint is how do we put in additional cafes and outdoor areas that people can sit in and partake and enjoy the views. We've narrowed the road down to the 33, so we have, as you see there, 2 cars and a parking loading flex lane. It's actually, the parking loading flex lane is on the outside of the outer promenade. And then we have the inner promenade, which abuts the monument, where again, it gives us the ability to add more activities going on closer to the monument and activating that space. In terms of the spokes on Market and Meridian, we are looking to do utilize a similar concept, narrowing the roadway there, so making the lanes a little bit tighter and narrower, so that way we can expand the sidewalks and try to incorporate cafe zones along the various spokes. We're looking to put in a 6-foot amenity zone, so again, tables and chairs for people to sit on, benches. We're looking at trees and planters, and again, adding some pop and color and life to those particular spokes. Some of the other concepts that we've been toying with is where to put bike racks. Of course, Indianapolis's bike share program could be implemented in these particular areas. And one of the big things that we've heard is public restrooms. And so we're looking at the concept that like Portland is using at this point in time and how we might be able to bring that here to Indianapolis. This just gives you an idea and a thought about some of the concepts in terms of, you see kind of a summer market happening right there on the right-hand side of the picture. And then one of the light towers. This is a conceptual design. Chances are when you see it, it will not look like this once we get the final design done. But figuring out how we provide uplighting to buildings and to the monument, as well as lighting the paths and the benches where people could sit. We've figured out we're working on how to figure out to incorporate sound into the light structure, so then when we have events and concerts on the circle, that could be heard all the way around. And then also, again, these conveniences of people being able to plug in their iPhones or their iPads or their Android phones in order to charge them while they're out there. So we're trying to, again, look at how we incorporate technology and modernize the circle from that perspective. We're also looking at wayfinding, so that these can provide people directions within the city, but also talk about the historical significance of the monument and this particular space. One of the other things that we're working with the city on is looking at how do we use this potentially as a sponsorship platform to help generate revenue to support programming and maintenance for the space. So again, these are just some concepts, not necessarily what the final design will look like. And then finally, I just want to leave you with some potential images. These are images that we developed during the design workshop to begin to really help provide the public with a vision of what this space could be when it's fully engaged. And so we have a couple of different views, as you see, showing how we can activate the space and how we can provide more programming and events and really enhance it without impacting pedestrian and vehicular movement. So in terms of the schedule, we started the design of phase 1 to look at the whole entire area and figure out conceptually what could we do for the entire Monument Circle district. And we completed that in January of this year. A couple of months later, we started what we call the design phase 2, which was beginning the 30% design of just Governor Square. And so we will have that completed by November 2014. But some of the things that we're looking at is we're completing the survey of the particular area. Especially important is the vaults that exist underneath the pavement and attached to these buildings. So we've gone out and completed the survey of that. Like I said, we're doing 30% design plans for that Governor Square. And then we've also been doing a lot of public outreach, focus groups, tenant meetings. We're looking at having a community booth here before the summer ends. And then we're slated to have our public meeting in early November where we unveil the 30% designs and get public feedback on them. The other thing that we'll be doing is outlining the characteristics of the program and management organization and what the city should be looking for. After that, then we will finalize plans. So in the engineering world, it's moving through 60, 90, and 100% design drawings. For Governor Square, we anticipate that being completed late by 2015, and all during that time we will continue to have public outreach and driving people to the project website and talking with people through Facebook and Twitter to tell them about what's going on with the project. We anticipate construction at this point in time in 2016 and 2017. Again, that's for Governor Square only. Again, if we're able to secure all the funding. So at that point in time, that really tells you where we stand with this particular project and the exciting things to come. And I'll open it up and answer any questions that you might have. Alex.
I did a design competition a couple years ago. Has that competition of the ideas for that influences the process? I don't know if he's one of those. Does that influence you?
It has. The design team has sat down and gone over all of those designs that put out there. Some of those designs were incorporated into a scoping report that was completed a couple of years ago. So we've reviewed that scoping report, we reviewed those designs, talked to some of the people involved with that, talked with IDI about those, and then there's pieces and parts and elements that we've pulled out to it and incorporated into what you see as the concept today. So we've tried to be sensitive to what has already undertaken through previous processes and figured out, what things truly do work and what can we do here. So yes, a lot of that creating the extra pedestrian space came from the design competition of where people really were getting into how do we activate those ground floors and how do we get more people out on the circle. Yes.
I have two questions. One is, you mentioned that with the 3 lanes of traffic now, sometimes there are police or emergency vehicles parked on one. When it's reduced to 2 lanes, do you still expect police, emergency, and other vehicles to be parked on one of the lanes, thereby reducing it to 1, or do you expect that not to occur at that point? And the other is that I don't know much about the scope of the Americans with Disabilities Act. These instances where the circle fails, the area fails to meet the criteria of that legislation, is it a requirement that they do, or is it just something that really ought to be done? Is it a legal requirement in all those instances that the ADA requirements applied completely to that?
Okay. On your first question, yes, I still expect public vehicles to be parked at times along that particular area. We're working very closely with the fire department and the police department on access to the circle based on the new design, as well as shutting it down for events. One of the things that they have talked to us about is right now they have to put up sawhorses and police cars, or utilize their police cars as barriers to keep people coming onto the circle. One of the concepts that we're working on at this point in time is both signage and signaling to help divert traffic away from the circle, but then also utilizing boom gates. So designing those so that they sit as, if you will, an architectural feature on the side of the road, and the police would then come in and slide one or both gates down to shut down the circle. And the other way we're also addressing this is in how we're spacing the bollards and other landscape features in this particular area that trucks and police cars and fire trucks could still maintain access or be able to park in between them like they do now. So we're not anticipating overhauling or changing that spacing there. In terms of the ADA accessibility, we will be meeting the criteria. One of the things, I mean, it's required by law, and so one of the things that we are doing is trying to figure out ways that we could go above and beyond that, if possible. So we've been working very closely with the city's Office of Disability and figuring out how do we really ensure that the space as well as the monument is, I mean, it's already accessible. It's just not up to the current standards. So we're figuring out, you know, first of all, from the pavement side and the ramps, how do we make that accessible from everyone? But we've been working also closely with the state to figure out how do we provide additional access to that monument. So we really are trying to go above and beyond what the standards are from the government.
Sure. So did you say that the brick, I guess red brick is it? The bricks are one way in which that currently it's not impermissibly falling short of the ADA requirements?
Yes, the ramps that we have there now, because it is a curbed environment, and some of the ramps, not all of them, but some of them in this entire district are not ADA accessible. Now, as the city has gone back and done repairs on the circle and on the spokes, they have gone ahead and started to convert some of these ramps to make them ADA accessible. And so, like I said, we're looking at trying to upgrade them for this particular project. Okay, well, thank you very much for attending today. I really appreciate it. I hope you learned a little bit more about what we're doing.